Welcome to the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast with your host, Breakup Bestie, aka me, Kendra. Breakups are hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Each week, I will be taking you through a different topic as it relates to breaking up, healing from heartbreak, growing in your single life, dating, and getting back into happier and healthier relationships. The goal of this show is to provide support, hope, tips, and to remind you that above all, this too shall pass. Welcome to another episode of the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast. I have another guest on today. Today I have Katie H., who is a relationship and intimacy coach, as well as an embodiment teacher. And the topic we are discussing today is all about intimacy and vulnerability and how that helps with healing from a breakup. I get messages so often from people who are really feeling this intimacy void because of the breakup, whether that is physical intimacy or emotional intimacy. There just feels like there's this giant gaping hole in their life. So I wanted to bring Katie on to discuss what is intimacy and how is vulnerability so closely linked with that. And I think one thing you'll find in this episode is the whole notion of physical intimacy is really small when we look at the whole picture. So many of you who believe because you don't have that partner anymore and you're missing the physical intimacy, that doesn't mean that you have lost all intimacy. So we explore, how do you have that relationship with yourself? How can you cultivate intimacy in your friendships? And we also discuss why having a personal vulnerability practice is so important, not only in your single life, but also moving forward into future relationships. Katie also shares part of her story of going through a divorce and how she was able to switch her mindset from thinking a partner is everything, providing all sense of worth and companionship and intimacy, and how she was able to flip that and see that it all really starts with her. So this is an incredible conversation. I learned so much from it, and this is definitely a personal journey that I've had to go through in learning how I can cultivate intimacy with myself. And I've learned the power of vulnerability, not only with other people and sharing what's really going on with me, which is so key to healing, but also how do I have a vulnerable relationship with myself. And I did want to give one little warning before we get started. I talk very briefly about a traumatic experience that happened when I was in my teens. I share about sexual trauma in a very, very general way, but I did want to give a warning for anyone that does not want to hear about that. So without further ado, here is Katie H. Well, welcome, Katie, to the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today and chat with you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so for people that don't know you, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes. So I am a relationship and intimacy coach. I've been practicing a little over 2.5 years. I live in Los Angeles, but the sweet spot for me is really working with women and sometimes their partners. But we work together to um, establish a new understanding of themselves. So I have kind of a combination of like masculine, feminine education and dynamics teaching. Um, and I also have a combination of like sociological aspects. I teach dialectic behavioral therapy, and then I also just believe truly in the power of connection.
That's so beautiful. I feel like that's such a need, like that would be such a need for me when I was single, and also like, in a marriage, because I feel like there's such different I've faced so many different issues in terms of intimacy and relating to other people, connecting to other people when I was single, and then it's like a whole new ballpark being in a really long-term relationship. So I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
mean, I
that's so
always like
needed.
to think like either you're doing the work outside of a relationship when you're single, or you're doing the work in a relationship when you're partnered. And so either way, you're doing the work, you know, and you don't have to be in a relationship to be doing this work.
And I think that's such a good message for people listening to remind you that just because like it's not that everything changes and everything gets simple when you're in a relationship. It's just different. It's like different issues and different things to work through. I think so many people think that once they have the relationship, then everything goes away. And that's absolutely not the case at all. And I'm sure you can see that with your clients.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's all the beliefs that we have around being single or all the beliefs that we have around being in a relationship. What does it mean for you to be in a relationship? Does it mean that I was talking about this the other day on Instagram. Like, does it mean that suddenly you're worth more because you're claimed? Does it mean suddenly that, um, you're fixed or you're whole because you're in a relationship? These are all the things that we receive messages about and the kind of microdoses day to day, not only from society, but, with our family, especially like certain family cultures, depending on what your, ethnicity is or what your background is or your culture is, emphasize being in a relationship more than others. But, or like, what does it mean to be single? Does it mean that
Mhm.
you're like an old maid? Does it mean, for women, it means something very different than it is when you're a man. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, it's such interesting work, and what I wanted to bring you on to talk about today is this whole idea of healing using like through intimacy, because I think, and we'll talk about this later, but so many people that I talk to that are going through breakups think that because they don't have a partner anymore, that means that they don't have intimacy with other people, or they're kind of just left alone, and that's like a huge void in their life. And I think not only was I so excited because of your expertise, but also you have a very personal journey with all of this that I wanted to talk to you about too. So the first thing, and I know this is by no means a simple definition, but how do you define intimacy?
I think it's a practice of, and you talked about vulnerability quite a few times, like in our prep for this, but like, um, it's a practice of allowing someone to see you and accept you through the practice of vulnerability. You can't have intimacy without vulnerability.
So and intimacy is not just sex at all. Like
No.
that's something that, and that's a question I have later on for you, but oh my gosh, the rewiring that I've had to do on intimacy is mind-blowing, and it's like completely changed how I relate to my partner and how I relate to my friends and myself. And I remember someone said like intimacy is into me I see, right?
You see, yeah.
Into me you see,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
And
such
I
a good
thought that
point.
was so beautiful.
It is
Yeah.
so beautiful. Like, so, and I know you want to talk about the types of intimacy, but um, there are definitely different types of intimacy. Um, but the I think the most potent, the most powerful type of intimacy you can have is the one with yourself. And so that's really what I teach women to do, is to get just like solid, super grounded, super filled up um in our own lives and our different types of connection and our sisterhood and our day-to-day, day in day out practices that keep us alive and full and radiant and nourished, so that when you do experience a breakup, that your whole life doesn't collapse before your eyes, that you also have other things going on that fill you and define you and allow you to identify yourself, you know instead of like it just being that one person. That's actually like what happened. That's what got me into this work, is that that's what happened to me. And you're like the breakup expert. I see you every day, like talking to the camera about this. And every single time I see it, I'm like, oh, that was me. That was me. That was me. But yeah, I mean, like, the thing that got me into this was when I got a divorce, like, I did not know who I was because everything was wrapped up in my marriage or my partnership with that person. And so, yeah, I think the intimacy with yourself is really the sweet spot.
Yeah, and going back to, your story of getting into this, I'd love to hear, I guess, what was, because I think a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's a big jump to go from I get my worth, validation, like happiness from another person to actually, no, I get it from myself. What was that turning point for you?
Oh my god. Well, mine was such a volatile situation. My story is not your average story, and I don't really want to spend time talking about
Yeah.
it. But it was just so incredibly volatile. So it initially was me kind of saying, okay, it's like either I die here emotionally, or and my son also would like watch his mom kind of begin to deteriorate. Um, or I have an opportunity to step out and kind of reclaim my life for myself because I knew something was up, but it was so foggy at that point, um, that I didn't really know what that was that you were talking about. Like, it was such a process of me finally stepping out, finally, it was little micro, you know, doses of
Yeah.
change for me. It happened over time. So, finding my own place, learning to live on my own, learning to pay my own bills as a single person, learning to multitask, being a mother, working, finding a job that was fulfilling for me. And I made so many mistakes. It was unreal. You know, I think um oftentimes I think that people get so tripped up with the amount of time it takes to heal.
Yeah.
Like we think that it's going to be one day we're just going to say like, "Oh, I feel so much better now. I feel like I'm totally over him or her." And the fact is like the grief comes in and out.
Yeah. And that's probably the most common question that I get asked is like, when am I going to stop feeling this way? Or when do I know if I'm healed? And you were so spot on with it's a process, and I think we sometimes forget to celebrate the little milestones of, oh, oh, it's been a week and I haven't cried, or this is the first time that I've talked to, another potential partner and didn't like didn't like freak out about it afterwards, or this is the first time I've enjoyed being in bed by myself. Like all of those things are huge milestones in the healing process. And I think you're right. We get so tripped up at this like crazy finish line that feels really far, and we don't know when we're going to get it, instead of these little milestones that all add up to something really big and important. So I love that you touched on that. And the other thing that you said that I think is really powerful is, and thank you for sharing, that story with us, someone who's in a relationship that's not ideal. We get the question a lot of like, why did I stay? Why, like, this anger towards ourselves. And it's like, when we don't know what we don't know. So when you don't know that there is a relationship with yourself available that can provide love, worthiness, all of that stuff, if we don't know that exists, we think we're walking into this empty void of nothingness, you
Oh my
know?
gosh. Yes. It's so scary. And like you said, you don't know what you don't know. When you know better, you do better. Those are like two things I just live by. And so yeah, and so the opportunity to cultivate a healthy relationship with yourself is supremely important. It's the fundamentals of having a healthy relationship. Or
Yeah.
else you're literally taking yourself and you are wrapping yourself in a bow for another person, you're handing over your happiness to another person and saying, okay, like, do what you will with this
Yeah.
mess, you
And
know?
we forget that we have, I spent so much of my life liking who liked me. That was like the only qualification.
Oh my God. You just have to like me. That's it.
Yeah, that's
I
it. If you
can't be
like
discerning or picky or have standards.
Yeah, I don't have any power to choose, but if you like me, I'll like you. And honestly, it was like the point where I, started dating someone that just really liked me. I had very low self-esteem at the time, and I was very like I didn't want to date them, but finally I'm like, all right, I guess we're dating. And then I got broken up with by him. And I finally had this moment where I'm like, what am I doing? Like I didn't even like this person in the
I
first
love
place.
those
And
moments.
yeah, so I'm like,
It's
okay,
such a great
something.
reckoning.
Yes, and that is not to say that, that was, like, the big turning point for me, but it was one of the and I think we also don't appreciate the, like, seeds that get planted, so, if you watch my stories and, I'm saying, like, how important no contact is, and then the next hour you reach out to your ex, like, that's not a failure. You still have that, like, seed planted in your head, and it's kinda like you'll do it when, sometimes like you'll have something pop up that someone said 6 months ago and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's right." So,
Yeah,
just realizing that it's such a long journey and it's messy. It's filled with a
so
lot of,
messy. Yeah, I
ups
mean,
and
and things
downs.
resonate when they resonate. It happens, not everything is gonna hit the mark when you hear it, God, wouldn't the world be so much easier if just, like, you heard something and it, like, clicked in all the places and then you just implemented it and life was grand, But yeah, those seeds that are planted, it's so crazy. When the first like relationship, air quotes, that I had after my divorce was it like knocked me out. It came like I never thought that I would like love again or find love or like enjoyment in anything. And so this person comes in, we have this like very fun kind of new relationship, and I was a total hot mess inside, but like it wiped me out so hard that um I the only solace that I had was to podcast like from morning to night. And I drove a whole lot for work at that time. And so I dove into like Mark Groves and like all kinds of different breakup podcasts, and just I remember feeling like a sponge and being like, okay, I don't feel like this right now, but one day, like I will feel the fog clear, or I will feel, like I won't have to stalk his Instagram because it's like a whole other category of crazy rabbit hole. um and it did. It took like so long for it all to implement or to land with me. But eventually, you get to those places where it feels so much more clear. You feel like you have much more control over your life. I mean, breakups take you out of control,
Yes.
and so like it takes you a minute to find the steering wheel again and to get back in the driver's seat of your own life. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the whole I get messages from people a lot that they're like, "I'm listening to the podcast, like I'm doing the work, I don't feel better." And it's like, yes, that's normal, like
Well, they're coming
I
off of a drug. Like that's another thing is,
yes.
breakups or relationships, like intimate connections hit the same centers of the brain that actual drugs do. So we're getting like all of these hits of like dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, and like for men it's vasopressin and oxytocin for the bonding after we're physically intimate. And then we develop like this trust, and our day in day out we have this relationship that starts to form with our brain chemicals, and then all of a sudden someone takes that drug away, and we're going through a chemical withdrawal. And so that's why we don't feel better right away. And so it's almost like you have to say, okay, like I'm going to put myself in rehab,
Yeah.
for like a solid year. And just like, how are all the ways that I can give myself tons of TLC? And there's also this other spot. I know we planned on talking about like opening this puppy up like a little bit later, but
We can
there's
open
also,
it now.
okay. So there's also so much shame that comes along with breakups that I think it's very easy to shut down in that spot where you say like, this is so painful for me. And you know, and very often we start to turn on ourselves. Like, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. Was I not enough? Why did this happen? If there was cheating involved, there's just like so many levels of shame and judgment that go along with breakups that I think that the best healing that can happen through breakups is in community. So that's like the easiest place to shut down. But in alchemization of shame and healing through connection, we're forced to, we're called to, or invited to be vulnerable with others. And that's why I think it's like the best thing to have a group, some kind of group, sister group, sisterhood, group therapy, um, talk therapy. I did DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy. It was tremendously helpful for me. Um, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, but it just was like the thing that helped me get over the hump of shame. So
Yeah, and this is a perfect piggyback because this is coming out the week after my, support system episode because I could not agree with you more. The importance of I always say like there's really not much more powerful than you sharing something with someone that you're so ashamed of and they say, "Oh yeah, like I felt
me too.
that. I've
Yeah.
done that. Me too." It's honestly, I mean, in my process of getting sober, I can remember exactly where I was and when it happened when I got sober and I had all of these things that I was so ashamed of. And like each time someone else said that they experienced that too, it was like every time it was like wall come down, walls coming down. Like I can open myself up. I'm okay. I'm not a bad person. Um,
It's
it's really
so
so
powerful.
important. Yeah. And I think you touched on it a little bit with vulnerability, but I did not know vulnerability and intimacy were so closely related. I mean, to be completely honest, like I thought intimacy was, like just
Having sex.
having sex and like, nothing before or after or anything like that. And I think vulnerability is the key to that. So I think breakups are this amazing I think breakups are opportunities for a lot of things, but I think especially they're a great way to almost force us into vulnerability, and that can have so many payoffs. But can you talk a little bit about how that forced you to utilize vulnerability and how you help your clients with that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that having a personal practice of vulnerability is really the sweet spot. It is the most courageous thing that you can do is to use vulnerability in times that you don't particularly feel like it, when you're feeling tremendous shame or guilt or judgment, or it's something that needs to be kept a secret. Like Brene Brown talks about shame as being held in three areas: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so,
Mm.
like, opening up those three is um, really is like the recipe for vulnerability. First, I think either you can use vulnerability as a manipulation tactic, or it can be like the deepest practice of devotion that you have to yourself.
Mm.
Because really, what it's saying is, um, I trust myself enough to allow you to see this part of me.
Yeah.
Right. And then, like, but if we're not conscious that we're doing it for ourselves, then, and we're doing it in this unconscious way, it can feel very manipulative. Right. Am I touching on this question?
Yeah, no,
Like,
it's no, this is great, and I think I've never thought about it like that, but I've 100% been the person that, like, on the second date with someone, like, tells them, like, everything, but I'm not doing it like, I'm doing it because I think that's gonna bond us together,
Totally.
but it's
Yes.
false.
Yes, totally. I think every woman can resonate with that. Yeah, like because we use emotional banter as a way to bring someone closer to us, right? With people who, for the most part, are probably very emotionally illiterate or like not emotionally fluent, um, or available for it, or even know what we're talking about.
Yes.
And so, in that, um, there's like, there's so much room to play victim in that role. Like, oh my gosh, I opened up to him or her. Um, but like I've said, like, I can't believe he was such a dot dot dot. I opened up to him. I can't believe he dropped me or didn't respect me or used it against me, blah blah blah. When really, like, if I knew myself well enough and I had practiced being intimate with myself and getting to know myself, I would have been able to feel that that was not the right time, place, person to share that with. That's what I call like finding the spot. Like, was it really the spot for you to open up in that moment? Was it the right, did it feel like the right thing for the appropriate thing to do in the moment? Or were you using it as a manipulation tactic to bring that person closer?
And I think that applies to friendships too, where and just remembering that, like, when you're sharing that you're struggling after a breakup, if you're being vulnerable by, opening up to a friend, they're like, you really have to let go of the expectations of what they're going to say, do, feel, because it's like they don't feel the same way we do. We deal with things differently, and just remembering, like, it's for you. And I've learned that, like, in the 12-step community, is like, when I share in a meeting, I'm sharing for me. Like, I'm not sharing it for praise or connection or sympathy or anything like that. It's like, when we speak up, it should be for us.
The practice for yourself. I
Yeah.
love that so much. I mean, we're not taught that.
No.
And especially as women, we're not taught to hold that amount of space for ourselves and have that confidence and have that practice of opening up for us. And that's why I just think that it's like the best thing to do is to be in group settings, vulnerable in group settings. It is the key to healing.
And what would you say, I guess, two questions. What would a normal vulnerability practice look like necessarily? Like, what are some practical ways that someone can start incorporating that into their life?
Yeah. So I think, like anything, vulnerability exists on a spectrum. You can go like super vulnerable, or you can take things a little lighter and a little bit more digestible and a little bit more sustainable over time. And so I always think, like, I look at the people or the environment or the person in front of me first, just to kind of assess what their range is. So I think about range as like where you're willing to go with it. So, or what someone's actually capable of. And so that's how I sort of assess how to connect through vulnerability, is like, if I'm talking to one of my friends that usually is very lighthearted, very um, light and bubbly, kind of is more surface level, there's nothing wrong with that. But, like, doesn't like to go super deep all the time with me, then I'm not going to ask her a question like, um, tell me about a place in your life where you feel the most shame. Like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
right? So I adjust the depth of vulnerability according to that. But usually, a really easy practice for that is to do what I call an inside out, and that's just like the prompt for an inside out is right now I'm feeling. It's
Oh,
super
yeah.
simple. You can either make it more somatic and body based, like, oh, right now my hands are really cold, or right now I have a terrible headache, or I have to pee, or whatever it is, or you can go more emotional. like right now I'm feeling really nervous about this meeting that's coming up, or right now I'm feeling like I want to hug you, or right. So you can kind of like
Yeah.
take it wherever you are. But it's a really good practice to have with friends, but also in a partnership with in a romantic relationship.
And I think, yeah, I love those. And I remember, just the big shift for me in when someone asked me if like, how are you? I didn't just say, oh, I'm good. Like I wouldn't like unload on everyone, but if I wasn't feeling great, I'm like, yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay, like working through this. And, my like first response isn't just to always say that I'm good.
Good.
And
Right.
that was a big shift for me. And I think too, the ability to be vulnerable in a partnership, a lot of that has to come with knowing yourself. Because it's like, how do I even know? Like, how do I learn how to identify my emotions? Like, for a long time, it was like, my chest is tight. What does that mean?
So good. I'm so glad that you brought that up. Yeah. And so like that prompt can take you, more somatic based, more body based. I believe that your life and all of your experience lives in your body. And so the having physical sensations is just the emotional transmutation experience, right? So if you can identify sensations in the body, then you can usually follow that thread to get to the emotion that you're experiencing, right? That's why the right now I'm feeling is so helpful, because if you can say, like you said, I have tightness in my chest, or my cheeks are hot, or um I have flutters in my tummy, it means, you're feeling a little anxiety, you have some nervous energy, maybe you're excited, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, like tightness in my chest and butterflies in my tummy just means I'm excited. And so then there's like ding, there's this light bulb moment where you start to have a deeper connection with your body. And that's really, I mean, I teach through movement, but also through this exercise as well.
If you are looking for even more help and guidance on your breakup, you can get my step by step healing process using my courses. No matter where you might feel stuck in your breakup, there is a course for you. If your breakup just happened and you feel completely overwhelmed by the intense feelings, you can get all the tools to get started with my breakup emergency first aid kit. If you feel like you can't stop reaching out to your ex, checking their social media, or obsessing about them, you can get all the tools and accountability you need from Detox Your Ex. If some time has passed after your breakup, but you still feel like you can't let go of it, I can help you let go of your ex using my Breakthrough Your Breakup course. If you feel like you might be ready to start dating again, but you're scared to get hurt again or don't trust yourself to date yet, I will give you everything you need to feel confident moving forward in my Moving On After Heartbreak course. If you want all of these things to take you from beginning to end after a breakup, you can grab my signature course, Heal Your Breakup. All of my courses include videos from me, a workbook, and my breakup journal to help you feel supported and guided through this process. Head to the link in my show notes to take the quiz and find out which course is best for you so you can start moving on, healing, and feeling happy again. Now back to the episode. And I know you posted on your stories the other day, Body Keeps the Score, which is like next on my reading list. I'm so excited to read that. I think that's something that I've discovered in the last couple years of realizing like I was always someone that got like anytime I was sick growing up, it was like strep throat, something with my throat. And I realized I never speak, like, I have a really hard time speaking up for myself. So my throat's blocked. And that's why, and I have thyroid issues, which is in my throat. It's just,
So
it's
crazy.
so wild of how our bodies really do know what's going on. And I shared this on another interview, but when I was in my abusive relationship, I was having my body was like screaming at me that
Mhm.
it wasn't the right thing to be in. And I didn't see it, so you don't know what you don't know. But afterwards it was like, "Oh yeah, this is why your stomach was crazy and you had all these other health issues. It was your body trying to tell you something." So, and I think
Absolutely.
I get asked by people like, how do I start journaling? And I loved what you said is like, start by journaling and just being, saying, the room's cold. I have this thing today. Like, start wherever you can. And then as you do it, you'll be able to go deeper, right?
Absolutely. I mean, so we're working with the feminine. I mean, mostly I think most of your followers and the people who are listening here are women or people who identify as women. Am I correct?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and so when I'm talking when I am I do a lot of masculine feminine dynamic training and education. So when we're working with the feminine, like this thing does not just like we can't like put a gun to our heads and say, okay, open up.
Yeah.
You know, it
Yeah.
I think about the feminine like a candle. Like we have all of these like dynamic tones and florals and um, fragrances, and they're complex, but you have to put a little heat to the wax in order for it to like slowly start to melt and for those things to start to come out. And so, depth and trust and feeling safe enough to open up and be vulnerable, those things happen through connection and over time. So yeah, start with, I see a white wall, my feet feel cold, and then in time, in your own personal unique time, everyone's is a little bit different. Yeah, you'll start to open up and feel that depth come out through your journaling or your movement. Like I teach feminine movement. Women will start like, I don't even know how to move my hips. And then by like the third or fifth or seventh class, they're like, whoa, this
Yeah.
feels so amazing. I didn't know my spine could curve like this. I just love the stretch. And you're feeling like their chests opening all the way up and things like that. So it happens
And
over
if
time.
you and if you guys aren't already following Katie on Instagram, I will put her handle in the show notes, but I love watching your videos. I think it's just and that kind of leads me to the next question of like, but I think, our bodies, getting to know our bodies is so important with getting to know ourselves because it's obviously a huge part of us. And one thing that I get asked a lot with intimacy is people will say that they really obviously miss like the physical intimacy with their ex. And I think that was a big message I wanted to get across in this episode is, I think you've heard so far that intimacy, we haven't really talked about sex once, since we've gotten started on this, but what are some ways that people can practice intimacy without a partner? Whether
Oh,
that's physical, emotional, whatever.
absolutely. We're taught to only have intimacy if we have a partner, right? But then self pleasure or self intimacy is like very deeply shamed,
Yeah.
right? When so a lot of this is an alchemy process of kind of rewiring, unlearning, and then relearning how to engage in intimate practices that really truly are nourishing, not what we've been taught or what we've been handed down or what's hereditary shame that we've taken on as our own. But so I am a huge fan of self pleasure. I think it's like the best way to get to know your own body and to develop a relationship of trust with your hands, with your intuition. I think the way that we are with our own bodies as women is the way we are out in the world and in relationships. And so, um, everything that we're experiencing in the world is just a mirror image of our own relationship with ourselves, right? And that goes back also to our own relationship to being intimate with our bodies, with our genitals, right? With our breasts, with our curve, with our trauma, with our stretch marks, with our cellulite, with our dimples and our weight and all of that stuff. So I think that I'm I teach my clients how to have rituals. So like feminine rituals, and most of the time that includes like a bathing process that feels really delicious to you, and setting the ambiance, and then creating a nest for yourself. And a nest is like blankets and pillows, or maybe it's on your bed or your couch or on a yoga mat or on sheepskin rugs or candles or whatever. Um, and allowing time for your body to open up, and then like creating warmth, creating safety with your hands and your body, and really like just dousing yourself in love and approval and affection and compassion for what your body has been through, right? And then I think that it's important to experience pleasure with yourself, you know?
I love that. And I think I mean, there's so much, unfortunately, there's still so much shame, especially I think for women with self-pleasure and being able to, because I mean, I know for me, and this is kind of jumping into a new question with like how this can also help with trauma, is like creating that safety. And speaking for me personally, I had a sexual trauma in when I was 16 that I didn't even look at for 10 years. I just didn't want to look at it. And what that resulted in was like I didn't feel like I had any relationship or control over my body. So it was almost like no matter, even if I was with someone who was loving and kind and caring, I still felt like an object because
Yeah.
I didn't have any trust over my own body. And you would think that like, and obviously I went through a lot of therapy to get to this place, but reaching this place where like I felt like it was my body
Mm.
again. And I think even
Yeah.
if people haven't been through sexual trauma, we all have traumas and hurts from past relationships where we don't have that trust level with ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, you said, like, my body became my own. It took a while for you to realize that. And I think it's 1 in 3 women who have experienced sexual trauma, 1 in 6 men. It's huge. Women are talking about this now, men, not so much. So the process of healing is often, it starts with a reclamation of your own body, because, like, owning it. It is so normal to have stretch marks. It is so normal. It is healthy. It is 100% of women have cellulite, like we have to reclaim this system of ours.
Yeah. And just thinking like the difference in who you're attracted to, or who is attracted to you, having that positive, loving, vulnerable, intimate relationship with yourself versus not. Because
It's
I can
insane.
speak very clearly to this just in my own experience, but like when I didn't do that, any guy that would sleep with me, I like felt this huge emotional connection to, because I'm like, they're
Trauma
giving,
bond.
they're like, they want me. In my head, I'm thinking I'm like undesirable because of X, Y, or Z, my weight or my, these, I have a big, big forehead, or like, any of these things that like I grew up thinking. So the second that they showed me that kind of affection, I was like a magnet to them, whereas
Yeah, it's
after,
trauma bonding. I love,
exactly.
like, Mark Groves talks about eroticizing our pain, and that's
Ooh,
such a
interesting.
great example. So we like to eroticize our pain, like you had this trauma inside that was, someone has violated me or entered my space without permission, and I don't know any of the details, but um or objectified me, or crossed my boundaries without permission and taken up all of these places where I didn't own in myself too, maybe. And then we abandon ourselves from there. And then we attract people who are like magnets for doing it over and over and over again.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, it got to a point. So so crazy to look back, but it got to a point where I remember this was before I got sober, so I'd be like out drinking at a bar. I'd have like a one night stand with someone, and literally like the next day, like I would tell my friends that like I met someone. Like literally, like I literally thought this was a relation, like the beginnings of a relationship. Like as if I were taken out on some like five-star date the night before, when it was like
Yeah.
I met them at a bar and slept with them and that's what I thought. It's just it's so wild to me that that was my frame of mind. But that was all the conditioning, that was the framework that I had. I still hadn't resolved this trauma. Um and so
Ama-
doing all that work now, obviously things look very different.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, God, if I had a penny for every time I've heard stories like that, we do so many things. We twist ourselves into pretzels in order to be claimed by someone else in the places that we truly, really, the thing is that we need to be claiming ourselves in.
Yeah.
So we exaggerate, or we pump up stories, or we eroticize, or all the things we do in order to get love.
It no, it and it always, always, always comes back to us.
Yeah.
And I love those practices that you shared, and I think, we all have our own paths to figure out like how we can be comfortable with our bodies and be comfortable with, you know, even I think there's, an intimacy in like I'm trying to think of an example, but like me learning that I really enjoy certain things. Like, I'm someone I love puzzles. Like, that's great. I love that about me. But, getting to know all those little things about me that are super special and like make me who I am. And that's really powerful too, because I know what I bring to people.
Yes, I know. One of the exercises I was doing, a manifestation around love with to be magnetic. I don't know if you follow her on Instagram, but it's
Well,
like,
we both have our common friend Heather
oh my
who
God,
we
yeah.
love. Yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
where I get my to be magnetic from.
Okay, good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't know if I could mention her here, but
Yep.
yeah, Heather's amazing. Heather Whitaker, if anyone
Yes.
wants to know.
Definitely worth a follow. Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. She knows, so she's like one of my sister's very good friends, and then her and Danica know each other, and you guys know each other, and then yeah, that's how we're all kind of
I
involved.
know. It's so fun.
So she was my coach, and we were doing Unblocked Love, and she was like, well, one of the exercises was like journal about what you bring to the table, and I do this work. I'm a professionally trained, like licensed, and I found myself like a deer in headlights. I was like, uh, dig deep, girl, dig deep. So it is something that you kind of have to continually practice to keep kind of that engine warm and revved up all the time. This is why I think feminine practices should be at the cornerstone of what we do day in and day out, like foundational practices, that keep us in connection with ourselves, like yoga, meditation, being creative, self pleasure, being in sisterhood. All of those things I think are such great practices that get us to that point where you say, this is what I bring to the table. Like, I love dark comedy, or I love, I can do British accents quite well, or, I have a dream of doing stand up, or, you know what I mean? Without that discovery, you don't really know what you bring to the table.
Yeah, I actually just this year I started, or this last year I started, I have this list on my phone of like things Kendra likes. And I'll like, once I think of something, I'll put it on there. Because I'm someone that I always tried to buy high heels and like boots and like all these things. And I'm like, I love sneakers. Like I wore sneakers on my wedding day. Like that's something that I love. So I like wrote it down on the list because it's like, okay, this is what Kendra likes,
I love
and
it.
that's okay. um and then my last question for you, talking about the concept of sisterhood, which I think is so important. And I had I sent this to you in email, but I had this mentor once tell me that like I would never, not I would never, but I would have a really hard time having an intimate relationship with a man until I could have an intimate relationship with a woman, like
Oh my
meaning
god, this is the best question in the whole world.
yeah. And so I think especially when we're single, like we have this amazing opportunity to practice vulnerability and intimacy with friends that are so safe. And so, can you talk about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I love to open this one up. Um, I think that like trauma is a given of being a human being. It just is. We all have our own trauma. It all exists on a spectrum. It, you know, it could be physical or sexual or emotional or whatever. We all have trauma. But there is like this very deep spot where um I feel like there could be so much uh um like we could stop what's it called when you're trying to like not cause damage control. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we can create so much damage control around future trauma by working with how we were traumatized by the feminine as young girls. So go back
Mm.
to like how we were traumatized as girls in school. We were body shamed. Boys were taught they were pussies. Um, Women were taught that we had to be a certain size, or we were made fun of, or we were told that we were a slut, or whatever. And 9 times out of 10, we were taught that from other women, which means there's like this huge wound in the fabric of feminine, right? And so what happens is like we have those very formative we experience trauma in those really formative years as girls, and then as grown women we like take that wound or those group of wounds and into our relationships. And if we're talking about a heteronormative relationship, we hand it to our man and we say, okay, fix this wound, this place where I was taught that I was too fat, I was too ugly, I was a slut, and I have all of these subsequent traumas that were formed from that one area. And I'm going to give it to you so that you can fix it, so that you can validate me, so that you can tell me I'm okay or lovable again or whatever. And so, having a practice of being in sisterhood and being vulnerable in sisterhood is it's alchemy at its finest. We're going back to the root of where the trauma happened, and that was with other girls.
I'm like speechless because I never made that connection with,
So good.
I mean, I had a lot of trauma with, girlfriends growing up, became like the guy's girl, and like I remember when I got sober, they were like, you need to make friends with women. And I'm like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
But it was because like women force you to be vulnerable. They don't force you, but like they mirror vulnerability. So
Well,
I didn't.
we're like bloodhounds,
Yeah.
even when you're not being vulnerable, we can like smell that there's like something going on.
Yeah.
So women are feminine geniuses in emotionality. And so like you have to touch in with your emotions in order to practice vulnerability. And in that way, the feminine leads here. I always say like the feminine brings the heart, the masculine brings the consciousness, but the feminine brings the heart. Putting ourselves in sisterhood, in connection with women who are also very much experiencing that same shame and trauma and grief in their own experience of being a woman is pure fucking power. It's pure fucking power. It's like we then get filled.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have done so much healing through my girlfriends and, my sisters, and even now being in a marriage, I will tell you, like, I don't really think my marriage would be what it is if I didn't have my friends, because like they fill something really, really important to me. And like my husband, even through all this, through the quarantine, he's like, I think you need to like go spend time with your friends because like it makes a big difference.
Yeah,
Um,
I was told when I was pretty young, that like you can't, you can't expect for one person to fulfill all your needs. And
yes.
especially, that's what I think this whole like you complete me kind of, or like I'm whole because of you. I'm like, gross, it's so outdated. What are you talking about?
It's so, oh my gosh, I talk about that all the time, like the missing, actually, I just wrote a post that's going up later today about like the missing puzzle piece kind of a
Yeah,
thing. It's just, that's not,
a
I
thing.
think it takes a relationship with yourself. It takes a relationship with community, and then the romantic one like should be the, like the cherry on top.
Yeah, totally. That is a huge burden to place on someone.
Yes. And I think it's
Hey, like,
I can never say her name. Esther Perel. She talks about like
yes, amazing.
how we expect our partners to be our confidant and our best friend and our partner in crime and our biggest motivator and our cheerleader and the person that's going to help us grow and like all this stuff. It's like it's exhausting. Like no one can, not one person, like no one person can do that. And I think one thing that I've gotten from being able to be like intimate with myself and vulnerable with myself is like I know where I need to get certain things from. Like I can tell the difference intuitively. Like, okay, I'm feeling like not super heard. Like I need someone to listen to me. It's like, okay, husband's like at work or distracted by something, like, okay, I know which friend to go to with this thing. Like, okay, I need some like motherly love. It's like I have different women I can go to for that. But I don't think I wouldn't have any of that if I didn't have that self-awareness, vulnerability, intimacy.
Tremendously skillful practice is to go to different places for different needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but again, such it's a journey, still learning it, still making lots of mistakes along the way. But thank you so much. I know I have learned so much just in this last hour of talking to you, and I'm sure everyone listening has gotten so much out of it as well. If someone wants to work with you, as I said, definitely follow Katie on Instagram. But how can they connect with you? How can they find you? And maybe you can talk about some of the offerings that you have.
Yes. So my Instagram is katieh.coach. I talk to the camera. I try to every day, although not
No,
every day.
you're great. You always have so much good stuff on there.
Oh my gosh. And my website is katiehenrickscoaching.com. I offer one-on-one coaching with private clients, which is probably like my very favorite thing to do. I teach sensual feminine movement classes. I have a women's group that I host from the 1st through the 5th of every month. It's my women's challenge, and every month has a new theme. So sometimes talk about like healing or confidence or sexuality or creating a desire led home or sisterhood. And those are really great opportunities to feel a sense of community, kind of get your creative and your vulnerable juices flowing, kind of give you a little bit of a boost for your month. That's only $50. So it's kind of a great, efficient way to connect. You can sign up for my newsletter on my front page of my website. And I also offer discovery calls. If you're thinking about hiring a coach or working with me privately, we can always schedule a discovery call. And that's 20 to 30 minutes where we just figure out if we want to work together. And then, just like you, I'm also on Hey Hero, where you can ask
Oh,
me specific
yay.
questions, book time with me, and connect that way. So,
Amazing. Well, I feel like this is so up the alley of everyone that's listening. And I think, like your challenge and getting involved in the community in that way, I think will be so helpful. So thank you so much, Katie. I'm going to put all of her info in the show notes so you can link right to her website. But thank you so much. And I loved having you on.
thank you for having me. It was fun.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you loved it, I hope you'll leave me a review and share with your friends. If you're interested in learning more about my course, Heal Your Breakup, where I take you step by step through my entire healing process, you can find more info at my website, breakupbestie.com. And if you're new, don't forget to join our private Facebook group so you can connect with other women going through the same thing and seek support. You can search Breakup Bestie Support Group on Facebook to join. Lastly, if you're not already following me on Instagram, I share new tips and support every single day. You can find me at Your Breakup Bestie. Most importantly, hang in there, stay connected with loved ones, be nice to yourself, and remember, it's all going to be okay. I promise.